Connecting to server. Got it. All right. Well, welcome to Jesus TV, Jesus in this mess. And so, what you didn't see, we won't talk about the details of, but we just had a conversation that would be called a difficult conversation. It wasn't super difficult, but when you have a group of people that are different than one another, which is what you always have in families, in everywhere. It just comes with life. It's a part of the package. Because if they're not you, even if they're you, you can actually have problems with yourself. And so disagreements, and there's a book called Difficult Conversations, and I've never read it, but I know the title says it all. That in this life, in order for us to walk with Christ, we have to be able to develop a capacity to have difficult conversations. And part of those is a lot of it is miscommunications. And so a lot of the time when you walk with Christ, you'll think you heard one thing, but it wasn't what you thought. And what you heard, maybe even from Jesus, you read the scriptures and say, well, here's how it's going to be. So you just walk forward thinking this is how it's going to be. And surprise, it's not. And that's the Jewish leaders of the time, Pharisees, Sadducees, and the people, that the Messiah is going to come and he's going to deliver us from bondage. Well, he absolutely did. It wasn't the kind of deliverance you were expecting, though. So you have some difficult conversations with Jesus, and we've all had those, but we were having difficult conversations with one another, and we can all do difficult things. But sometimes people are like, oh, no, I can't do this. And so things get stopped or damned. And so that's what I'm speaking of. And so we decided to frame this episode, what we have left, probably 20 minutes or so, just that understanding that in your walk with Christ and our walk collectively, if we are to formulate a new culture, a new society, we are going to have to learn how to disagree in agreeable ways. Yeah, we disagree, but we were agreeable, or we're kind, or long-suffering, gentle, meek, forgiving, um, and so that's the intro. If you guys have any thoughts, but that's the intro to that.
I think it just has to do the importance of being brave, because when I had some things that I needed to bring up with these two, it was really hard for me because I deeply care about Jonathan and Greg, and I didn't want to jeopardize our friendship. I had a similar conversation with a really good friend of ours, one of our husbands, probably our best friends. We had to have a similar conversation with them earlier this year. So one of the things that my husband that happens to us sometimes is we're pretty nice people, but sometimes what happens, and I don't think it happened in this case, but sometimes what happens is we've noticed that we get taken advantage of sometimes. And again, I don't really feel like it happened in the case we talked about earlier, but sometimes it happens with us, and people will just kind of use us, and they don't realize that, like, for example, like they'll send their kids over every day and they'll be here for hours and hours. And then if we ever need something, they're like, oh no, sorry, like your kids can't. And we're like, or sometimes they'll do that. And it essentially ends up becoming like free babysitting. And like, we don't have a problem with kids coming to play, but then it's like, if they're hanging out here and we're like, oh, it's time for you to go home, and then they're like, oh, my parents aren't home. They went to go do this and they're going to be gone for a few hours. And that's happened to us. And we're like, yeah, we're not babysitters. We don't like babysitting, but if you want to play with our kids, that's cool. You know what I'm saying? And so we've had to have some conversations like that. And usually with our neighbors, it's like not an offense thing. Usually it's like, oh yeah, we just figured they were there. We needed to go run this errand really fast. And we're like, so like Greg said, it all comes down, I think, to communication. Like if people, and together we can, I think this happens a lot in religion too. Actually, I know it happens a lot. But the thing is, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to have those hard conversations. It's hard to have it with those that are close to you. It's hard to have it in your same household. The amount of anxiety these conversations cause me is crazy. Like when I knew I had to have this conversation, I didn't sleep at all. I like right? No. So that's
Yes,
kind of where,
and yeah, I'm so
yeah.
sorry. Yeah, and part of the thing is because we're not equipped. This is not difficult conversations. We grew up in a culture. It's not just the LDS culture, a wider culture. It's a go along, get along, let's get along. We don't. There are other cultures where there's huge disagreements and they debate things. For instance, a little pod of that is called the Supreme Court. Those are kind of different individuals. They are used to vigorously, sharply disagreeing, and then they go have lunch together with smiles and laughter. And you're like, what is that? Well, if you ever watch a football game, same thing can happen. They will talk trash to each other, and then these guys will go to a party together. Oh yeah, you really. It's like, um, is there a world that you can live in where you can be sharp, blunt, and then go to sleep fine at night? Yes, there is, but that's not the world we live in. We live in a world that Emily's talking about, where like you lose sleep because you got to tell these people, and I like them, but I need to tell them this truth. And it's like, oh God bless her heart, because that hurts my heart, Emily. Like, because I'm not built that way. I sleep okay. I might have 5 minutes of that anxiety, like, oh, this bothers me. Okay, I'm going to sleep. And I had to be built that way because I am very sensitive, like you are, and it would wreck me too. But I've got certain things with my mission to do that I have to be able to say, okay, we're going to keep that in that box and this in this box. We did. We're human. We cared about it for 5 minutes. So we're like Emily. Well, yeah, but she did it all night. I know. I'm doing it for 5 minutes. So if I lose my job, oh, Greg's going to be mad for 5 minutes. Yeah, and then I'm like, okay, what's next? Go get another job. And I'm aware of that capacity, and it is a gift. It's a curse too, because like you probably ought to mourn a little bit more. And so it's a cursed gift. But ultimately, where we need to go as a society, we got to be robust and strong and nimble enough that we can have difficult conversations without people running away with their toys. Let's stay here and let's work through this. And but it's inevitable because, in fact, I'll tell you, Emily, when you were talking, I'm like, you set this up, didn't you, Jesus? And he did. This is the harder part of Jesus. He sets these things up. He did for Joseph Smith. Hey, now's a good time to do banking. Right. At the very time when there's bank failures going, he has Joseph Smith. I know that's Jesus. Yeah, why don't you start a bank and have all your friends chip in? Let's see how that works. That's called a divine chicane. That's called an obstacle course that can separate friends from foes. And so certain people forgave Joseph, the prophet who said, "Hey, let's do a bank," and others didn't. And so it started separating wheat from tares, if you will. And let's not be bad on the tares. It just there's certain people who were not quite outfitted to go do the next thing, which was go in the west and settle the whole Rocky Mountains. You needed to get down to those people. And so in the grand scheme of things, it's good we have tender-hearted people that get offended and they walk away. They can still go do good things. That's how I view it. But I also know um, we're not going to build Zion unless we can have difficult conversations and not get offended. We practice this. Forgive your enemies. Love your enemies. So even people who vigorously disagree with you, is there a way in which you can respond to them with peace and kindness? Anyhow, go ahead, Jonathan. I saw your hand up.
What occurred to me was just that it's inevitable because of, I think, the nature of mortality or existence. We have the problems of space and time and perception. And so it's like, well, how are you going to handle space? It's tricky, it's like, and what constitutes boundaries, like the boundaries of a home. It's like I've become convinced it's like, a man and a wife and their kids is it's the integral unit of existence. and it's like from one family to another. And it's almost like everything tries to mimic that. Like, like when the state, the government becomes larger, and it'll oftentimes take things from the family and start acting like the family. Um, and I don't know where the lines are as far as government goes, but as far as a home goes, it's like that's the way that you create peace. That's the way that you create um, continuity for the children. And you go into different homes going down a street, and it's all different. And so it's like there's a sanctity of the family, and so it's like, and I kind of wonder, it's built into the very way that things exist. And so, long story short, it's inevitable that there are misunderstandings, and the ability to handle them is really important, because what we all want to protect is, I think, is uh, I guess, the integrity of the individual and the integrity of the family. So so what was I going to say? It's inevitable, and you have to have talks. And I know for myself, like with what we were talking about earlier, it's like it's always interesting navigating your path in the world, as if like the ocean is full of ships, too many. It's like the earth is full, and you're trying to kind of make your way through, or like a ship trying to make its way through treacherous waters where there's big rocks underneath, and trying not to run into somebody else's island. I tend to be the kind of person, I am super careful to try to not bump into somebody else. And being that I live kind of on the outskirts, it means that I keep trying to keep moving, so that I don't, cause any offense. And so, but inevitably you do. Like one of the wrenches that God threw me was having a dog. It's like we had a dog for a little while a few years ago, and it ended up turning out badly. We were staying, I actually, we had, it was when we were in South Dakota. I talked about South Dakota last time. And I had the impression it was time to move on, and I did not move on. Somebody offered us a place to stay, and our little dog killed a couple of their chickens, and I ended up having to give up the dog. It was one of the most difficult circumstances I'd ever been in. But it's like having a dog is kind of a big thing, and then God plops this dog in my lap, and I didn't, it's like you don't realize how difficult it is to, like, anytime you decide to do something or be somewhere, especially with me, because I live like in my van, it's like, oh crap, that's right, I have a dog, and oh, he's out there and he's barking all of a sudden, but I'm not quite leaving as soon as I expected, and okay, what do I do now? But what I found is that in the end, it's like with love, it all just works out. It's like we all love each other, and sometimes you have people who can't take the hint, but most of us can take a hint when we realize we've stepped over a boundary. But anyways, it's inevitable, and we have to just humbly talk about it and work through it. So that's all.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, maybe God brings these up with us because my husband and I are both very sensitive, and I think we're both very kind people. We have a hard time setting boundaries, is really what it comes down to. And so I think this has been a year for us, like with some of our conversations with the people that we care about, of just setting boundaries. Because part of it is we've always been like, oh, we really love these people. And then we kind of get walked over. Not that these people are trying to walk on us, it's because we didn't establish boundaries. It's not like the people it's not like our friends or like anyone being like, oh, we're going to do this and take advantage. It's more like they're like, oh, I didn't think you guys cared. And the truth is, it's like, oh, well, we do kind of care. I mean, not just more like a care of just like run this by us kind of care usually. But it's yeah, it's hard to set those boundaries for both of us. So usually what happens is something happens and we're like, whoa, that doesn't make us comfortable. And that I think is a sign like, oh, we need to set a boundary. If we don't like that kind of thing, it just means set a boundary. And it's something that actually I've been when I was going to a lot of addiction recovery stuff, I started first learning about boundaries, like 5 years ago. I didn't even realize like I don't know, I guess I didn't even realize there were boundaries. Like I always just wanted to be a really kind person. And I think, like you said, it's important. And I think like it makes me really uncomfortable to bring up boundary conversations. I hate it with a passion. And then maybe that's why it keeps happening. But it's something I've learned as a teacher too. You know, I have to learn to set boundaries. I mean, I do with my students, but I also have to learn like I want to always help my students, but like they can't always, like if I'm teaching a class, another student wants to come in and talk just about whatever, I usually have to be like, hey, like I'm teaching right now. I want to talk to you. Can you come back at this point? You know, it's like when you're working, like, you know, it's just, and usually boundaries, one of the books I read on boundaries, I don't remember what it's called. Well, I only read part of it because that's what I do with self-help books. I never finish them. I guess if I finish a self-help book, that means that I've been totally self-helped. So if I never finish it, apparently that means, I don't know, I'm just saying I never finished them. I don't know why. It's just really weird. Anyways, but that one was saying like boundaries, when you're setting boundaries, usually it's a lot of difficult discussion. And then once those boundaries get made, it's better. Like with my husband and I, we're always trying to set boundaries. Part of it is there's a lot of things at home that like we just assume the other person's gonna do, and then they don't do it, and then we get mad. One or the other of us is like, I thought you were gonna do the dishes. And I was like, well, I thought you were gonna do the dishes. And then the dishes don't, so that's kind of what happened. Well, this morning it was just, we got too busy. And so we had like literally, we have a lot of dishes and they all got used. I mean, I bet we have like 30 bowls. I don't think we've done dishes for like 3 days. And with the family, that's a lot of dishes. And that's concluding having pizza 2 nights. So we didn't really use dishes. But so it's like, then we usually have to set some kind of boundary deal. My husband, I'm like, honey, if you paint downstairs, that kind of hurts my wrist and we need that room painted. If you can do the primer paint downstairs, I'll load the dishes. And he hates doing dishes. And I'm like, and I'll start cleaning the kitchen a little bit just so we can have kind of like a functional kitchen. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we got to be able to have dishes, you know, and at least 2 square feet of counter space, you know, just minimals. Anyway, so yeah, that's just kind of, yeah, you guys can go ahead, but that's just kind of what I was thinking. But I should say too, so I have like Greg and Jonathan, I really don't want you to feel bad about giving me, I have a lot of anxiety. So me having a lack of sleep is a fairly normal thing. So it's more, and so usually when I'm struggling, when I'm staying up really late, like I know times in the past I've stayed up really late and I'm really tired on here or I miss it. It's usually because there's some kind of boundary I have to set either with others or a lot of times for myself. And if I don't do it, I get this like crazy anxiety and it just like repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats in my head. And I'm like, until I like write it down and I have to be like, okay, we need to have a conversation about this. And then once I like make that decision, then I'm like usually okay. I'd be like, okay, this is what I need to talk about. But it's just, I just tend to avoid things and then they just become bigger things and they're really not that big. But in my head, they become huge and there's these overwhelming things. And that's actually one of the things that started me painting Jesus in this mess in the first place, was just because I get all these huge feelings and I'm ruminate. I've known that I'm a ruminator since I was a teenager and I first got diagnosed with stuff. They were like, oh, what you're doing is called ruminating. And I'm like, oh, that's where I like cycle about things and I think about the same thing again and again and again. And it's hard. It's hard to have that in some ways, but at the same time, it also makes me like, I can paint a lot of paintings all like in a short period of time, or I can do like, there's pros and cons, I guess, to it is what I'm saying. I don't know, I'm going to stop rambling. I feel like I've been talking a long time.
Yeah, I'd like to tie into something that's happened in 2023. I think it's a hinge point within our culture. 2024, Jesus tells me that's when we're going to see a show. So whether it's 25, 26, 27, you take that up with Jesus. But what I can see and I have eyes to see is culturally, and it has to do with what our conversation is. In 2023, just recently, we see these are 3 events, but there's more, but 3 that I can speak of. The coming out of The Sound of Freedom and the response to it, the coming out of Aldean's song about try that in a small town, and then just most recently, a person named Oliver Anthony, kind of like a nobody, who has shot up to #1. His song has. And what God is pointing out to me right now is the spirit of that song. It's the righteous indignation, meaning it's tuned to the right thing. It's tuned like Donald Trump is. Is like there's an anger, and if you, the Spirit giveth utterance to the groanings within us, and oftentimes that may not be the most Holy Spirit, but so his song's kind of angry, has some cussing in it, and so forth. But he's now giving voice to underlying things, so you can have a society that's ruminating, to use the term you're talking about, inside and amongst themselves. There's agitation, and you can't see it. It's like, no, it seems like life's going on, it's going on, but there's people crossing boundaries. Be like them parking out in front of your house or something, and you're like, this is bothering me, but I'm not going to say anything about it. We'll just kind of go along, and then there's going to be this explosion. And it won't be the French Revolution because we don't speak English. But whatever's coming in 2024 is going to be, or 25 or 26, is going to be memorable. Let's just say historically memorable because of the thing that you're talking about. But what God's, that third song, he said, you see how something righteous, because it's a righteous song. If you hear his story, he said no to $8 million. The music company's like, oh, do a contract with us. And he said no to $8 million. Like, oh my goodness, that's totally Jesus. And he uses flawed individuals. This guy's got mental health, he knows it. But that's the cool thing is, like, this guy's talking about his mental health status without shame. And like, this is a unique character, and just as Jordan Peterson is, and so forth. But there's something going on right there, and this is the hinge point. So these three things I've spoke of, and their reaction, for those that have eyes to see. And in other words, Jesus says, when you see the fig leaf, know that summer is nigh. In other words, there's a harvest coming, and it's going to be a disruptive harvest, but it's going to be good for us, is what I believe. So, but let me tie it to what we're talking about, which I kind of did, is there's things that are groanings. I'm using a scripture in Romans. The Spirit giveth utterance to the groanings within us. And so learning to let that Spirit, let's speak it, name it, claim it. And so he did. He goes, the rich man north of Richmond, in other words, the people in this society are not treating us fair. They're taking us for granted. And then he gives in the song certain ways. Well, I pull this to our understanding because of what we're talking about, but also because here's the pattern. It's oftentimes artists. Okay, so Emily's an artist, a painter, who give expression, and then people glue themselves. And so we're like, well, hold it, Donald Trump isn't an artist. Look up the phrase sacred clown and shaman and trickster. You'll see who Donald Trump really is. He's giving voice, and people are supporting him, not giving him $8 million, record companies, but they're giving support, and they do it knowing he is a clown. He is, but he's the clown that needs to disrupt that. And so this is the nature of revolution. Sometimes you're releasing something that's out of control because you're tight anxiety. And learning to do this well is what we have to learn how to do. Yes, express things that are inside your soul. You're saying, this should not stand. We've been putting up with this forever. Learn to express it, use English, use passion, but then don't do the next thing, which is this. Here's what's going to happen. The righteous, the righteously indignant, are going to get hijacked, and they're going to become just as wicked as the wicked people, the people who have been abusing. And that's what I believe is going to happen. Not in mass, because there's going to be some people who know that. You have to be balanced, all right? So this is a long, festering offense, but we need to not be filled with that spirit of offense. And so I wanted to share that in light, because it's a big warning for me, is that song. And I love that song. Would I say, don't play that song? No, that's from God. Yeah, but you're telling us, Greg, that's going to get hijacked. Oh, yeah. It's going to, because there's fears. And some people can't convert their fears into faith. That's the problem. We have not learned how to, let's take those fears, let's take that anger and give it expression. And that's what Christ can do. He's the mediator. He can mediate between the raw energy, what they'd say the lower chakra, and he can mediate until it comes out. Let's use our voice. So to end with this, have you ever heard teachers say, let's use our words, because little people are just like, I want to use my fists. I want to hit this little kid. Let's use our words. I'm angry. You didn't treat me fair. There we go. And then that actually has an effect, which is a calming effect. I've been heard. I've been recognized. And then if they don't recognize you, then Jesus invites you to the next thing. Love your enemies. But they revile me. I told them what they did, and they know that they're lying, and they know that I know they're lying, and yet they're still lying. That's right. What are you going to do? I'm going to go get them. Well, what about loving them while you go get them, perhaps? And so, anyways, I'll let you guys comment on that. I wanted to tie it into the wider framework that Jesus has me tapped into.
Jonathan, I thought you had something earlier you wanted to say.
Sure, I was just waiting to see if you had something first, but I'll go and then, yeah. So I'll start, I guess. So I was just going to say, all those, there's that scripture that all those who won't take up their sword against their neighbor will flee to Zion. Seems like the history of Zion is that Zion flees. It's like, Nephi in the promised land, and his brothers are coming around killing him. And it's like, what do? Well, let's try to get out of here, was their first reaction. And only did they really kind of put in their heels when they realized that, no matter where they fled, the Lamanites would keep coming for them. But I think that's my main thought. I just, I'm really to a place in my life where it's like, and that's, I think I live my life that way in a lot of ways. It's like, I try to keep moving enough so that it's a place of peace, I guess. And it's strange. I don't know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes in war, the worst place that you can be is in a place of not wanting to take sides. It's like, the one side, let's call it the red side, might be mad at the blue side, but who they're even madder at is the person who won't choose red or blue. It's like the person who says, no, I just want to, if you ever seen that movie, not the Shawshank Redemption, sorry, Hacksaw Ridge, about the young man who wouldn't carry a gun, and he ends up getting beat up by his fellow, and persecuted and everything else because he just said, I won't take up a gun. I won't fight this fight. And that's the way I feel when I look at everything that's happening. I don't know that we really want to go down that route, but it's like, and there's a problem. I used to always think that there was a solution, right? If we could just sit down and talk about this, we can come to an answer, together. But I have learned that there comes a point where there's irreconcilable differences. There's a point where if the thing that I think is right, you think is evil, and the thing that you think is right, I think is evil, then it's like either we go to war or we part ways. And that's really difficult. But that's just what I wanted to throw out. It makes me think of that scripture. I don't think there's any good answer for it other than I think the one that I most resonate with is the Gandhi idea. It's like, and in a lot of ways, it's like Greg and I have talked about this. It's like my life is kind of over. It's like, so it doesn't matter if, it's like, but I don't want to allow the media or anybody else to draw me into taking sides in what is coming, because I think both sides are going to lose. If that means that there's no place left, no place left where, there's no sides taken, and that, then that has to be the case. And it's like, and God will know how long he can hide me, and God will know how long he can, before, my life gets taken. But I don't want to fight in this next fight. So anyways, how do we get off on
And
that?
I've been told, so Jonathan's talking about kind of like loners, and so he's right, but that doesn't stay for very long. God gathers his sheep and into folds. So there's a transition time that's very awkward, lonely, but he will eventually gather his sheep. And so Jesus has put into my heart who I will gather with. There's going to be tribes. So if you search your heart, you'll know we're going to be breaking into tribes. We already have tribe approximations. And what you need to know is who's your tribe? What are the signs of your tribe? And I know that my tribe is going to be praying for their enemies, that they'll respect people who are mad about the rich men north of Richmond, and they'll not condemn anyone who has cuss words for those, but they will pray for the rich men of Richmond. And here's the main thing for my particular is we're going to gather in the name of Jesus Christ. That I've been told that I am to gather under his name, literally Jesus, nothing other than that. And it's because it has a cultural cachet. There's different sociological reasons, but there's a spiritual reason as well. And of course, what about if they call him the Great Spirit of the universe? I leave that to Jesus. I know who my tribe is, and we will gather. But I'm a loner, like Jonathan is, waiting for the tribe to gather, and we're close. It's called the Jesus Revolution. It's not called the Alder Revolution. It's not called, although those are good revolutions. God will put in people's hearts. But I'm gathering with the Jesus tribe, those who talk of Christ, preach of Christ, prophesy of Christ. Well, what about the other people who use euphemisms? That's perfectly fine. And if they want to join with the Jesus people, that's fine, or whatever the group decides to call themselves. But they will distinguish themselves by how they treat their enemies, I think. That's, anyways, this is what God's put in my heart, trying to get me ready and my children so that we will know where to go. Because if you go look throughout history, there was gatherings in everything, but there were times where you're pretty lonely until you gather, and sometimes it's just a family, but then that family gets joined by another family. So that's what God's put in my heart. And like Jonathan, I don't care. They can just kill me. It's like that's easier. And a lot of people are going to choose that. Their hearts will fail them, and they'll curse God. I'm not going to. I'm like, that's who I join with. Because that's right. Jesus put in my heart. When we're talking, Jonathan goes, "You already chose your group." So I'm gathering with the immortals because that's the ones that are big on Jesus. So, Greg, do you have a group? Oh, I do. Most of them are immortal. I talk to them often. Those are the ones. But then mortals will be drawn to that same energy. Okay, that's enough on my end.
All right. I had some thoughts on this all too. I've actually feel like Greg said, you'd said this big change is coming in 2024. I actually feel like, the world really changed in 2020, not just because of everything since COVID, but what I noticed is everybody became so much more divisive. And there were all these differences before, but what I feel like is everybody was so easy to offend ever since 2020. I never used to worry so much about what I said and what I did. I did a little bit, but now it's like, I really feel that. I just see in the news, I feel like everybody's out to get everybody else. And it's a scary place to be, where it's like you can't say and do what you believe in some ways. But the other thing I'm really trying to work on right now is, besides setting boundaries, it's just having this love and acceptance for people that believe things different than me. And maybe that sounds kind of weird, but just coming from where I come from, I don't know how to explain this without offending, right? but just, I guess basically just, it's okay for people to believe things that I think are false. and how to be okay with that, and how to be okay with people that have different religious or different political things, and how to be okay, and just, and how to, and how do you, I hear of some families, like some people I know, it's like their family, everybody's like a different religious belief, a different political belief, a different, everything belief, and they're okay. And they can talk about it and joke about it, and it's fine. And I would love to be to that place where I can be fine, where those I'm with can be fine. Because I don't like it when I go, because I've talked about this before in our situations, I don't like it when I go places and people are like, family or close friends, people, they're like, well, you're crazy. And they just think I'm crazy. And they think anything I do or say is crazy. And that's hard for me. That's what I've been like, Greg, I'm not strong like you. I care what people think a lot. And that is something I have been really, really working on. And so that's something I'm trying to learn, is to let go of that. And for me, it's just like baby steps at a time. I try to work on it. I care a lot, and I guess I see that as a weakness, but I'm also trying to learn to accept and love myself with all of my things. Like, yeah, I care a lot. Like, how can that be a good thing? How can I care a lot, so I understand other people that care a lot, I guess. I'm sensitive. I know what it's like to grow up and be sensitive, and for everyone to tell me, yeah, you're really sensitive. And so I know what that's like, I guess. I don't know. Like I said, these are all the thoughts that have kind of been going through my head this week, is just, and I guess it's just one step at a time. And, and just when I have things, I try to take care of them. And I'm also trying to learn to let others be who they are and say what they want to say, and just be like, I don't have to have an opinion on everything that everybody says. Sometimes it's better to give an opinion, and sometimes it's better to be quiet. And I'm trying to learn. I don't do it very well with you guys, I think, because I feel more comfortable talking, but I'm trying to learn to hold myself back a little bit in some situations. I think, like Greg, we were talking about earlier, sometimes I just don't know when to shut up, and I'm trying to learn that. Like I have a hard time, doing that. That's kind of where I was at. But we got to wrap it up pretty soon here. But
Yep.
that's kind of where I was.
I'm done. Jonathan, you got any last comments?
I'll just say, I like that comment by Emily, that I want the same thing. I think it's doubtful that we're going to run into somebody who believes exactly like us. And I'm amazed at the fact that there are certain people who, like, I'm convinced they have certain things wrong. But I'm not, but then at the same time, I'm saying to myself, well, I think so, I'm pretty sure. But it's interesting to me that some of those people who I'm just convinced have certain things wrong, have certain things really right. So it's this idea that it's like none of us have all the answers, but we can love one another, and we can feed each other by what, so it's like we no longer live in the world. This is my last comment. We no longer live in the world where all the answers are packaged and perfectly placed in one place. Like, this is the right religion. This is the right this is the right that. It's like, nope, that's the next lesson for us, is to be able to realize that, I think. I'll pass it back.
Yep, it's a great comment. Well, thanks for joining us on Jesus TV and Jesus in His Mess. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hope it fed your soul like it did ours.